My name is Jenny. I'm 38 years old, and while I used to stay slim without any effort when I was younger, I've noticed a bit of a belly lately. Perhaps this is middle-aged spread. But I suppose it's better than being too skinny like I was in my youth. I keep telling myself this to put off dieting, planning to start next year rather than tomorrow. By next year, I'll probably say, diet? Maybe next year. Now, I'll talk about a time when not only my body but also my mind was finer. Or maybe not. I felt like my heart was covered in thick hair. Well, it's a nostalgic story from those times. I'd love for you to listen. This happened about 10 years ago. My husband Steve's father, my father-in-law, passed away suddenly. That event significantly changed my daily life. It's pitiful to leave my mom alone at home, so I've decided to let her live with us. What? It was our 4th year of marriage. I was speechless at his sudden suggestion. To tell the truth, I don't get along well with my mother-in-law. She adored Steve too much and seemed to have wanted to keep him all to herself without marrying him off. If it couldn't be helped, she would have been okay with him marrying his ex-girlfriend, who she really liked. Well, honestly, that might also be a lie. She probably just said that to spite me. You will never let him marry, will you? Said my father-in-law. I'll end up alone. Steve added, and somehow we got her to agree to our marriage. Then, my mother-in-law proposed living in a duplex house. I was firmly against it, but Steve was like, I'm fine either way. Since then, the clash between my no to duplex and her live in a duplex or give my son back dug a deep rift in our mother-in-law and daughter-in-law relationship. My father-in-law used to stop her from going too far, but it seems the balance was lost with his death. Living together. You didn't even discuss this with me. Do I need to discuss having my parents live in a house that's in my name? I was speechless. Maybe he's right. But isn't it strange to decide without discussing it even when we're married? I was both annoyed and confused. However, no matter how many times I asked him to reconsider, Steve repeatedly insisted. It's already decided. Perhaps it would have been better to attach another house next to ours and live as a duplex. If I'm honest, I disliked both options, but at that time, I wished we could have at least discussed it more. Unfortunately, the very next day, my mother-in-law came to our house. When I saw her standing at the front door, the theme from Jaws played in my head, which would be a secret. I thought, oh no, from today on, I really have to live with this woman. Deeply disappointed, I led her to the living room, where she exclaimed, wow. The sense of interior is terrible. Why do you have such ugly sofas and cushions? I braced myself for comments about dirtiness, but the interior design? I'm sorry, Steve chose that. Sorry, Mom. I chose it. Shall we go buy your sofa together? As we said that, my mother-in-law's expression changed completely. Oh, if it's just the sofas, that's a great choice. But the sofas and the cushions don't match, do they? Let's go buy some cushions. She smiled sweetly and intertwined her arm with Steve's like a girlfriend. Seeing this, I got goosebumps on my arms. He also smiled sheepishly and reciprocated. Seriously, no way. Steve has always tended not to argue with his mother. Maybe he's just bad at standing up to his parents. Thanks to her demand for family time. Steve would stay several nights at his parents' house during holidays like Easter and Christmas, while I hardly ever went there except for Christmas. Because of this, I didn't have to watch their interactions for long hours. However, witnessing Steve and mother-in-law like this made me think. Could he be a mama's boy? No, that can't be right. I tried desperately to dismiss my suspicions, but they turned into conviction from the first day of living together. I'm going out to buy cushions with Mom, so you prepare dinner. Mom, what would you like to eat? How about Chinese? Can you make chili shrimp, Jenny? Sure you can, Jenny. I'm counting on you for chili shrimp and other Chinese dishes. With that, the pair left, assigning me the dinner preparation. There was no shrimp in the fridge. I thought, does this mean I also have to go shopping? It's not strange for them to go shopping together, but there's something slightly irritating about it. She didn't move from another state. In fact, her house is just around the corner. She should know the stores around here well enough. Let her buy her own cushions, and you should help with the housework. I had to suppress the urge to punch the wall, and irritated, I went out shopping. After returning from the shopping, I prepared the Chinese cuisine my mother-in-law wanted, waiting for their return. But they didn't come back, even though it was already evening, after having left in the morning. Worried as you would think, I decided to contact him. Hey, where are you? Dinner's ready. What? Dinner? Oh, sorry, just eat there. What do you mean? I'm out eating Chinese food with Mom. It's been fun catching up with her, and I completely forgot about dinner at home. Sorry. Steve laughed as if he had made a simple oversight. Hearing his laughter, I felt a boiling frustration. After going out of my way to buy groceries and cook for 3. I thought, if you were going to eat out, I could have just made something simple for myself. Nevertheless, I didn't want to eat with her anyway, so I didn't feel left behind. Anyway, it's only natural to be upset when you are asked by someone to prepare a meal and then get abandoned. This rocky start made me wonder if I could really manage living with my mother-in-law in the future. My anxiety only grew over the following 2 weeks. The relationship with my mother-in-law, which I had hoped might improve, only deteriorated day by day. She would constantly criticize my way of doing housework and my lifestyle. Take a bath before cooking dinner, it's unhygienic. Don't store perishables in their original packaging in the fridge, transfer them to airtight containers to avoid odors. Don't use disposable wipes for cleaning. Just use a rag. While I could almost understand her nitpicking, her next demand was baffling. Don't go to bed before Steve. Wait at least an hour and a half after he does. What kind of rule is that? It seemed like she was taking her son's authority too far. While I wanted to suggest sharing household duties since we were living together, I held back because I wanted to get along with her. I really wanted to improve the tense atmosphere in our home, so I tried my best to follow my mother-in-law's instructions as much as possible. However, my efforts proved futile. For example, one day, she scolded me for keeping perishables in their original packaging in the fridge. I followed her instructions, but the following day she would likely scold me for transferring them into different containers, claiming the containers would now smell. Her instructions change daily, and what she tells me one day often becomes a completely different story the next. This seemed to be her way of harassing her daughter-in-law. It was incredibly petty, and her smirking after criticizing me was infuriating. Enduring such treatment from morning till night, even someone as tough as me reached their mental limit. Living together for just 2 weeks felt like more than 6 months. I tried discussing this with Steve in our bedroom, but he was hardly supportive. Around that time, he had been overly attached to his mother, even meeting her for dates after work. When was the last time he dated me? Thus, my requests for him to mediate between his mother and me were futile. Mom's cooking has always been delicious. If she says to mind the fridge odors, she's right. She's a respectable mother, so you should just listen to her. You're always complaining about Mom. You don't empathize with how she feels living alone with us at all. Mom is always right. Maybe we should have reconsidered this marriage since she was against it. His praises for her mother was just endless. While I was constantly belittled despite doing all the housework, her inconsistent advice, which she proudly upheld, was increasingly validated. Eventually, I realized it was futile to argue and started thinking about how to endure each day without letting them get to me. It was easier to just nod along and ignore them. Just as I thought I had figured out how to cope, another incident occurred. Are we having fritters today? Oh. Why did you include eggplants, which I hate? Are you trying to upset me? Seeing the dinner dishes, she shouted. Sorry, I didn't know. But Steve likes it. I genuinely didn't know it was her disliked food, so I felt truly sorry. However, it seems it was a mistake to say. But Steve likes it. At that time. That's obvious. Do you think I don't know my own son's tastes? She yelled, infuriated. No, that's not what I meant. Please, don't pull on my apron, it's dangerous. As she yanked on my apron and even tried to pull my hair, she screamed. Shut up. Shut up. Shut up. You think you can just show up and take over? I am his one and only mother. Just as she pulled my apron sharply, the tie around my waist came undone, and I lost my balance, causing a pot of hot oil to tip over. Oh my gosh. I promptly pushed her away and dodged the oil, preventing a major accident. However, I couldn't avoid burning the tips of my left toes. Fortunately, it was only a minor burn from the oil that had cooled slightly after spilling. Before I could even cool my fingertips, I endured the pain and asked my mother-in-law. Are you okay? She angrily shouted back. That was dangerous. It's all because you were flailing about. I could have been burned because of you. What a frightening daughter-in-law you are. What? You were pulling on my apron. I was just trying to stop you. Didn't I say it was dangerous? Are you talking back now? After putting me in danger and not even apologizing. You really have no manners. I'd like to see who raised you. I swallowed the words I wanted to say back. You saw my parents at the wedding, didn't you? I had pushed her away to prevent her from getting burned, yet I was the one who got injured. And still, why must I be scolded like this? With all due respect, Mother. Just as I was about to retort, Steve came in from the front door. Really, if you're home, open the door. It's awful not to even unlock it when I ring the bell. Before him was the hot pot, the scattered oil, and a little distance away, his wife in disarray and his mother in a fury. Even my foolish husband could see something was terribly wrong. His face had turned pale. What happened here? He asked, to which his mother clung to him, crying. Steve. Help me. What's going on, Mom? Jenny suddenly started raging while she was cooking. I tried to stop her because it was dangerous, and she pushed me. What? I almost got severely burned by the oil. It was terrifying. I know you might be upset, Jenny, but please, stop bullying an old woman like me. After saying that, the mother-in-law looked at me and smirked. Steve, believing I was at fault without question, glared at me. I had been framed. You've been acting too high and mighty towards Mom lately. What? I was stunned by his sudden accusation. Far from acting superior, I had mostly been on the receiving end of orders. Most of the time, it was too tiring to argue, so I just agreed with whatever was said. It was absurd for him to say such things based only on what he heard from his mother, especially since he never witnessed how she constantly berated me. Mom is just trying to teach you how to be a good wife. Just follow her lead. After shouting at me, Steve looked satisfied with himself, and the mother-in-law applauded him. No one bothered to ask if I was hurt. I was furious. Ignoring him and mother-in-law, I cooled my foot. While my temper did not subside and I remained irritated, fortunately, the burn cooled down. Every time they saw me, they accused me of trying to hurt the mother-in-law, calling me a terrible wife. But I ignored all their comments. Let them say what they want. They'll be the ones to regret it in the end. The next day, I called my father and explained everything that had happened. That house is dangerous, come back home. He said that, but I asked for his help with something. Although he wanted to bring me home immediately, he became enthusiastic about helping once he heard my plan. That same day, my father came to the house where I lived with Steve and mother-in-law. My mom and dad are close to divorcing because they've been arguing, and it's sad to leave him in such a tense home, so I've decided to let my dad live with us from today. When I announced this, both Steve and mother-in-law were confused and started to object. What? Don't joke, Jenny. You can't just decide that without consulting me. That's too selfish, Jenny. How dare they say that? That's rich coming from you. You decided to live with your mother without consulting me at all. As I glared at him, Steve retorted. That's because this house is in my name. Yes, the house is in your name. But I had forgotten, but I used my savings from before we were married as the down payment for this house. Thinking about it, isn't this marital property? When Steve suddenly announced he would be living with his mother, I was too embarrassed to argue back then because I didn't know better. However, if a house is in Steve's name and the wife has contributed to the payments, it's considered marital property. Additionally, there was a time when I was paying the living expenses from my part-time job earnings. Therefore, there's no reason for him to do whatever he wants with his house because it's also mine. My comment left Steve speechless. The mother-in-law, flustered, looked back and forth between us. By the way, Steve, did you wash those clothes yourself? Caught off guard by my father's sudden comment, Steve looked bewildered. No. Jenny does the housework. At this, my father raised an eyebrow. Jenny's job? Don't you help out at all? This is your house, isn't it? Don't you do any housework in your own house? Well, the house belongs to Jenny too. You just boasted that it was your house. Can't you take care of your own home? Please stop. Steve is pitiful. As my father and Steve argued, the mother-in-law intervened. My father, knowing the situation from my stories, stared sternly at her. Oh. And who made that breakfast this morning? Jenny did. Do you have a problem with that? Of course, I do. You just eat the food she makes and wear the clothes she washes. And when I blamed him for that, you say Steve is pitiful? Isn't my daughter the one who's pitiful? Father continued. The only time you can say pitiful is if Steve does more housework than my daughter, and nevertheless I blame him unnecessarily. Are you saying it's pitiful because it's spot on and you want me to stop pointing it out? As my father relentlessly pointed out their faults, both Steve and his mother's faces turned red. Dad, let's leave it at that. You're right, but if you go on, these two might cry from embarrassment. They brought it upon themselves, yet they're so fragile. Laughing, my father's laughter made me chuckle too. What the hell? You're my wife, so of course, you should take care of me. Yes. It's enviable that you get to take care of Steve. I'd switch places with you if I could. Are they out of their minds? Do they even have brains? Steve, what you're describing isn't a wife but a slave, or maybe an unconditional mother who does everything for you. A wife should automatically take care of her husband's personal needs? Then, as a husband, you should also take care of mine. Marriage is about equality. My words made Steve freeze, and the mother-in-law became furious. Jenny. How can you speak to Steve like that? Oh, I'm just teaching Steve how to be a husband. I would like him to follow it properly. Don't you think so? And how exactly have you been speaking to my daughter, madam? My father and I mirrored the accusations they had made. Confronted with their own words, Steve and his mother fell silent. Really? People who can't do anything by themselves shouldn't be giving orders. All you do is tell others what to do without lifting a finger yourselves. Even when the pot tipped over last time. You seem to believe everything your mother says, but remember, I was the one who saved your precious mom. Steve widened his eyes in surprise at my words. That time, your mother was the one who attacked me while I was cooking. She caused the pot to nearly tip over, so I had to push her away to protect her. I ended up getting burned because of it. And yet, neither of you thanked me. Instead, you both blamed me. Ha, I've had enough of this house. My blunt words made Steve raise his voice. Wait, Jenny, what do you mean by enough? His face, which had been red with embarrassment, quickly turned pale. Enough means just that. I'm done with this house, with you, with everything. I'm filing for divorce. The mother-in-law grinned, pleased, while Steve froze. Wait, Jenny. I don't hate you. Maybe I got a bit carried away, it was just youthful folly. I was taking you for granted. Please understand. Youthful folly doesn't turn someone into a mama's boy. No matter what you say now, I dislike having a husband who walks arm in arm with his mother. What? It seemed that Steve had always considered such behavior normal. For the first time, he looked puzzled as if asking. That was the problem? No way we can understand each other in a lifetime. Choosing divorce is the right decision. However, the mother-in-law seemed unhappy with Steve's reaction. Steve. You don't need to hold on to such a woman. I'm here for you. She clung to him as if she were his girlfriend. But he shook her off. It's because Mom clings to me that things have gotten to this point. It's like everyone says I'm a mama's boy. It's your fault, Mom. What's wrong with being a mama's boy? You used to tell me how much you loved me. What are you talking about? I've always felt you were in the way. Please, Jenny, come back. I'll cut ties with her. What do you mean, Steve? Would you choose a woman who wants to abandon you over your own mother who raised you? Quiet. Just shut up, Mom. Traitor Steve. Heartless son. I trusted you. As a fierce argument broke out between mother and son, my father and I watched quietly for a moment, then exchanged a knowing look. Let's go home, Jenny. The atmosphere here is too toxic. Yes. It feels like even my lungs are becoming mama's boy. Thus, my brief marriage came to an end. Later, I mailed the divorce papers and successfully finalized the divorce. There was no compensation, which was fine by me as I was eager to cut ties quickly. Steve remained with his mother after saying he would cut ties, but when he tried to remarry a woman 5 years his junior, problems arose. His mother did not like the girl. Moreover, she tried to sabotage their relationship, leading to Steve finally cutting her off in anger. Later, it turned out that the girl was cheating, so the remarriage was called off, and Steve tried to reconcile with his mother. But this time, her mood did not improve. Having been repeatedly told he valued other women over his mother, she had finally had enough of him. Shocked, Steve fell into a spiral, becoming obsessed with a girl at a nightclub and ending up in debt. It's ironic that he cut ties with his mother and then couldn't handle the shock. Well, that's just like my ex-husband, always only seeing things from his point of view. Meanwhile, I'm enjoying my single life without remarrying. The company I joined after the divorce turned out to be a great fit for me since I excel in roles involving interaction with people. Thanks to my achievements there, I've been promoted quickly. Work has become more enjoyable than romance. While it's still hard for women to reach the same status as men, I'm aiming high. Holding one of the highest positions among women, it's not an impossible situation. It might still take some time, but having goals in life makes things interesting. Starting my job has broadened my social network and increased my circle of friends. Recently, I've even made friends at the sports gym I started attending with colleagues, and now we're planning a trip together. By the way, I've started dieting. No one interferes, and though it's not flashy, my days are sparkling with fun.
My name is Lena Pearson, and I've spent the last 30 years of my life as a nurse, tending to the sick and injured. But nothing in my career could have prepared me for the midnight call that shattered the peaceful silence of our empty nest. The shrill ring of the phone jolted me awake. I fumbled for it in the dark, my heart racing. "Hello," I whispered, careful not to wake Marcus. "Mom, it's Carter." My son's voice, absent for so long, sent a chill down my spine. "Carter? What's wrong?" "It's the middle of the night." "We've hit hard times, Mom. We're coming home." The words hung in the air, heavy with implications. I sat up, fully alert now. "What do you mean, coming home?" "Carter, where are you?" "We're about an hour out. Lila and the kids are with me. We need a place to stay." I could hear the familiar manipulative tone creeping into his voice, the same one he'd used countless times during his tumultuous teenage years. My stomach churned with a mix of concern and dread. Carter, you can't just show up like this. We need to talk about Dash. Mom, please. We have nowhere else to go. You wouldn't turn away your own grandchildren, would you? I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his words. Of course, he knew exactly which buttons to push. All right, I conceded, my voice tight. We'll talk when you get here. I hung up and turned to find Marcus awake, concern etched on his face. What's going on? Carter's coming home, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. With Lila and the kids. They say they've hit hard times. Marcus sat up, running a hand through his thinning hair. After all this time? Lena, we can't just dash. I know. I cut him off, climbing out of bed. But what choice do we have? They'll be here in an hour. As we hurried to prepare the guest room, memories of Carter's troubled past flooded back. The lies, the manipulation, the constant drama that had dominated our lives for so long. We'd finally found peace in our empty nest, looking forward to quiet evenings and leisurely mornings. Now, it felt like we were being thrown back into the eye of the storm. An hour later, headlights swept across our living room window. Marcus and I exchanged a look before opening the front door. There they stood, Carter, Lila, and 4 bleary-eyed children, surrounded by suitcases and boxes. Mom, Dad, Carter said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Thanks for taking us in. I hugged him stiffly, noting the designer watch on his wrist that seemed at odds with his claims of financial hardship. Of course, sweetheart. Come in, all of you. As they filed past us, Lila barely meeting our eyes, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being played once again. The amount of luggage they'd brought suggested this wasn't a short-term visit. We've set up the guest room, Marcus said, his voice carefully neutral. It'll be a tight fit, but Dash. Oh, we can't all squeeze in there, Lila interrupted, speaking for the first time. Carter and I will take the master bedroom. You two don't mind the guest room, do you? I felt Marcus stiffen beside me. Actually, we do mind, I said firmly. This is still our home, Lila. You'll make do with the guest room for now. Carter stepped in, ever the mediator. Come on, Mom. We've had a long drive. Can't we sort this out in the morning? I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw the same manipulative teenager who had caused us so much grief. But now, he was a grown man with his own family, still expecting us to bend to his will. As I helped settle the children into makeshift beds, a resolve began to form in my mind. This time would be different. This time, Carter and Lila would learn that actions have consequences and that our love didn't mean we were pushovers. Little did they know, their arrival had set in motion a chain of events that would change all our lives forever. The next morning, I awoke to the cacophony of unfamiliar voices and the pitter-patter of small feet. For a moment, I forgot about our unexpected guests. Reality crashed back as I entered the kitchen to find Lila rummaging through our pantry. Morning, Lena, she said, not bothering to turn around. You're out of cereal. The kids are starving. I bit back a retort. Good morning, Lila. I wasn't expecting to feed 6 extra people today. I'll go to the store later. Carter sauntered in, looking fresh despite the late-night arrival. Morning, Mom. Dad around? I need to borrow the car. Your father's at work, I replied, eyeing him suspiciously. Why do you need the car? He shrugged. Just want to check out the old neighborhood, you know? See what's changed. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. What about looking for work? I thought you said you'd hit hard times. Carter's easy smile faltered for a moment. Come on, Mom. We just got here. Give us a chance to settle in, will you? Before I could respond, the oldest of the children, 10-year-old Mia, came running in. Grandma, can we go to the park? I looked at Lila, expecting her to take charge, but she was busy scrolling through her phone. With a sigh, I nodded. Sure, sweetie. Let me get dressed and we'll go. As I herded the children to the park, leaving Carter and Lila behind, I couldn't help but feel a mix of joy at spending time with my grandchildren and frustration at their parents' apparent lack of responsibility. When we returned, I found Marcus home early, his face tight with barely concealed anger. "Lena, can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked, leading me to our bedroom. "What's wrong?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I already knew. Marcus ran a hand through his hair. "I came home to find Carter and Lila lounging by the pool, drinking our good wine. When I asked about job hunting, Carter laughed it off, saying they were taking a mental health day." "Lena, how long are we going to let this go on?" I sat heavily on the bed. "I don't know, Marcus. I don't want to turn them away, but they're taking advantage of us," he finished. "We need to set some ground rules." We agreed to talk to Carter and Lila that evening, but when dinner time came, they were nowhere to be found. A hastily scribbled note on the counter read, "Went out with some old friends. Don't wait up." As Marcus and I sat at the dinner table with our grandchildren, the tension was palpable. "Where's Mommy and Daddy?" little Emma asked, her bottom lip quivering. "They'll be back later, sweetheart," I assured her, even as anger bubbled inside me. "Let's enjoy our dinner, shall we?" Later that night, as Marcus and I lay in bed, unable to sleep, we heard Carter and Lila stumble in, giggling and shushing each other like teenagers. "Tomorrow," Marcus whispered, squeezing my hand. "We'll talk to them tomorrow." But tomorrow came and went, and the next day and the next. Each time we tried to broach the subject of their plans or contributions, Carter and Lila found ways to deflect or change the subject. They settled into our home as if it were their own, showing little regard for our routines or privacy. A week into their stay, I found myself standing in the doorway of our guest room, now a chaotic mess of toys, clothes, and suitcases, watching Lila paint her nails while Carter napped in the middle of the day. The sight of them, so carefree and unbothered, ignited something in me. I realized then that our kindness was being mistaken for weakness. The time for gentle prodding was over. If Carter and Lila wouldn't take responsibility for their lives, then Marcus and I would have to force their hand. As I closed the door quietly, leaving them to their idleness, I made a silent vow. This situation would change, and soon. Little did Carter and Lila know, their comfortable freeloading days were numbered. 2 weeks into Carter and Lila's stay, I reached my breaking point. I'd been covering extra shifts at the hospital to offset the increased expenses, and I was exhausted. Walking into our living room after a grueling 12-hour shift, I found Carter and Lila sprawled on the couch, surrounded by takeout containers. "Hey, Mom," Carter said, not bothering to look up from his phone. "Can you grab us some beers from the fridge?" Something inside me snapped. "No, Carter, I can't," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained anger. "What I can do is ask when you plan on looking for a job." Lila rolled her eyes. "We told you, we're going through a rough patch. We need time to dash." "To what?" I interrupted. "To drain our retirement savings? To teach your children that it's okay to mooch off others." Carter sat up, his face darkening. "Come on, Mom. That's not fair. We're family." "Family doesn't take advantage of each other," I shot back. "You said you hit hard times, but I haven't seen either of you lift a finger to improve your situation." Just then, Marcus walked in, his face grim. "Lena, we need to talk." In private. In our bedroom, Marcus showed me a bank statement he'd found while cleaning. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a series of large deposits. "They have money, Lena. A lot of it." My hands shook as I scanned the document. The numbers didn't lie. Carter and Lila had substantial savings. "They lied to us," I whispered, feeling a mixture of hurt and fury. Marcus nodded, his jaw clenched. "It's time we confront them." We marched back to the living room, where Carter and Lila were now arguing in hushed tones. They fell silent as we entered. "We know about the money," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. "You lied about being in financial trouble." Carter's face paled. "Mom, Dad, I can explain dash." "Save it," Marcus cut in. "We want the truth, and we want it now." Under our unwavering gaze, Carter and Lila's facade crumbled. They admitted they weren't broke at all. They'd simply grown tired of the responsibilities of maintaining their own home and paying bills. "We thought it would be easier to live here," Lila said, not meeting our eyes. We didn't think it would be such a big deal. I felt a surge of disappointment so profound it nearly knocked me off my feet. Not a big deal? I repeated, incredulous. You've disrupted our lives, taken advantage of our kindness, and set a terrible example for your children. How is that not a big deal? Carter tried to placate us. Look, we're sorry. We'll start contributing, okay? We'll pay rent, buy groceries, dash. No, I said, surprising even myself with the firmness in my voice. This isn't about money anymore. This is about respect, responsibility, and honesty, all of which you've shown a complete lack of. Marcus stepped forward, his expression resolute. We want you out. Not today, not this minute, but soon. You have 2 weeks to find your own place and move out. The shock on Carter and Lila's faces would have been comical if the situation weren't so serious. They sputtered protests and excuses, but Marcus and I stood firm. As they retreated to the guest room, presumably to discuss their options, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It hurt to be so stern with our son, but I knew it was necessary. That night, as Marcus and I lay in bed, I turned to him. Are we doing the right thing? I asked, doubt creeping in. He took my hand, squeezing it gently. We are, he assured me. They need to learn to stand on their own feet. We're not just doing this for us, we're doing it for them and for our grandchildren. I nodded, a plan already forming in my mind. Carter and Lila had brought this on themselves, but I was determined to turn this into a learning experience for all of us. Little did they know, their real challenge was just beginning. The morning after our confrontation, I woke up early, my mind racing with plans. Marcus was already in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee. I've been thinking, I said, sliding into the chair across from him. We need to do more than just kick them out. We need to teach them a lesson. Marcus raised an eyebrow. What did you have in mind? I laid out my plan, watching his expression shift from skepticism to understanding, and finally to agreement. By the time Carter and Lila stumbled into the kitchen, bleary-eyed and subdued, we were ready. Good morning, I said, my voice carefully neutral. We need to talk about your living situation. Carter tensed visibly. Mom, Dad, about last night, dash. Save it, Marcus interrupted. We've made a decision. We're downsizing. The shock on their faces was palpable. Lila found her voice first. Downsizing? What do you mean? I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the performance of a lifetime. We've realized that maintaining this house is too much for us. The expenses, the upkeep, it's draining our retirement savings. We're going to sell and move into a smaller place. Carter's eyes narrowed suspiciously. But what about us? Where are we supposed to go? That's not our problem, Marcus said firmly. You're adults with your own resources. It's time you found your own place. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. We made a show of contacting real estate agents, discussing potential neighborhoods, and packing up non-essential items. Carter and Lila watched these proceedings with growing panic. Their previous nonchalance replaced by frantic whispered conversations and furtive phone calls. Behind the scenes, I was setting other wheels in motion. I reached out to an old nursing colleague, now an HR manager at a local company. Sarah, I said, trying to keep my voice casual, I was wondering if you had any job openings that might suit Carter's skills? Sarah, bless her, didn't ask questions. Within days, she'd arranged an interview for Carter. Now came the tricky part, ensuring he'd actually go. I casually mentioned the opportunity over dinner one night. Oh, Carter, I forgot to tell you. My friend Sarah said her company is hiring. I took the liberty of sending over your resume, and they'd like to interview you next week. Carter nearly choked on his food.
Mom.
You can't just dash. Can't just what? I interrupted, my voice sharp. Help my son find employment when he clearly needs it? Unless, of course, you have other prospects lined up? The silence that followed was answer enough. Carter grudgingly agreed to the interview, while Lila sulked beside him. As the days passed, the pressure mounted. Carter and Lila's bickering increased, their united front crumbling under the strain of impending responsibility. I overheard snippets of their arguments, complaints about job searching, worries about affording rent, debates about asking friends for help. Through it all, Marcus and I maintained our facade of downsizing preparations. We scheduled viewings of smaller homes, making sure Carter and Lila overheard our discussions about reduced square footage and single bathrooms. The night before Carter's interview, I found him sitting alone on the back porch, staring into the darkness. For a moment, I saw the vulnerable boy he'd once been, and my heart ached. "You know," I said softly, sitting beside him, "your father, and I only want what's best for you and your family." Carter nodded, not meeting my eyes. "I know, Mom. I don't know if I can do this." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You can, Carter. You're stronger than you think. But you have to want it for yourself, not just because we're pushing you." As I headed back inside, leaving Carter to his thoughts, I felt a mix of hope and trepidation. Our plan was in motion, but would it be enough to shake Carter and Lila out of their complacency? Only time would tell. Little did they know, the real test was yet to come. The next phase of our plan would push them to their limits, forcing them to confront the consequences of their actions head-on. The day after Carter's job interview, tension in the house reached a fever pitch. I deliberately avoided asking about it, waiting for him to volunteer the information. When he didn't, I knew things hadn't gone well. That evening, Marcus and I called a family meeting. Carter and Lila sat on the couch, their postures defensive, while we stood before them. "We've found a new place," Marcus announced without preamble. "We're moving out next week." The shock on their faces was almost comical. Lila was the first to recover. But what about us? Where are we supposed to go?" I steeled myself, knowing this was the moment of truth. "You have 3 options," I said, my voice firm. 1, you find your own place immediately. 2, you stay here and pay market rate rent. Or 3, you leave and figure things out on your own. Carter leaped to his feet. "This is insane. You can't just abandon us like this." "Abandon you?" I repeated, incredulous. "Carter, you're adults with 4 children. It's time you took responsibility for your lives." The next few days were chaos. Carter and Lila alternated between frantic apartment hunting and trying to guilt us into changing our minds. I overheard heated arguments between them, accusations flying about whose fault this was. Meanwhile, Marcus and I proceeded with our move. We packed boxes, rented a moving truck, and made a show of saying goodbye to neighbors. The children, caught in the middle of all this, were confused and upset. The night before our planned departure, I found 10-year-old Mia crying in the backyard. My heart ached as I sat beside her. "Grandma," she sniffled, "why do you have to leave? Don't you love us anymore?" I pulled her close, fighting back my own tears. "Oh, sweetheart, of course we love you. Sometimes, loving someone means doing what's best for them, even if it's hard." As I comforted Mia, I overheard Carter and Lila arguing in hushed tones nearby. "We can't afford anything decent on such short notice," Lila hissed. "Maybe we should just go back home." "And admit defeat?" Carter snapped back.
"No way."
"We'll figure something out." The next morning, moving day arrived. As we loaded the last of our boxes into the truck, Carter approached us, looking defeated. "Mom, Dad," he said, his voice strained, "we've found a place. It's not great, but it'll do for now. We're moving out tomorrow." I nodded, careful not to show my relief. "That's good, Carter. I hope this helps you get back on your feet." As we drove away, leaving Carter, Lila, and the kids standing in the driveway, I felt a mixture of guilt and determination. We weren't really moving, of course. We'd rented a small apartment across town as a temporary base, somewhere to retreat to while Carter and Lila faced the consequences of their actions. For the next week, we maintained radio silence, ignoring their calls and messages. It was harder than I'd anticipated, especially knowing our grandchildren were caught in the middle of this. Finally, after 7 days, we returned to the house. The sight that greeted us was sobering. The once immaculate lawn was overgrown, and through the windows, we could see piles of dishes in the sink and toys strewn across the floor. Carter answered the door, looking haggard and unkempt. "Mom? Dad? What are you doing here?" "We came to check on the house," Marcus said evenly. And on you. As we stepped inside, the full extent of the chaos became apparent. Lila was attempting to corral the younger children, while Mia sat in a corner, headphones on, ignoring the mayhem around her. Carter ran a hand through his disheveled hair. Look, I know this looks bad, but we're figuring it out. I've got a lead on a job, and Lila's looking into part-time work. I nodded, careful to keep my expression neutral. That's good to hear, Carter. But it looks like you could use some help getting organized. As I rolled up my sleeves, preparing to tackle the mess, I knew we were at a crossroads. The easy thing would be to step in and fix everything. But the right thing, the thing that would truly help Carter and Lila in the long run, would be to guide them towards solving their own problems. The real test was just beginning, and I was determined to see it through, no matter how difficult it might be. Over the next few weeks, I watched Carter and Lila struggle to adjust to their new reality. Carter had managed to secure the job at my friend Sarah's company, but it was clear he was floundering. Every evening, he'd return home looking more defeated than the day before. One particularly rough day, I overheard him on the phone in the backyard, his voice strained. I don't know if I can do this, Sarah. I'm not cut out for this kind of work. My heart ached, but I resisted the urge to intervene. This was a battle Carter needed to fight on his own. Meanwhile, Lila had reluctantly started job hunting. Her lack of work experience made it challenging, and her frustration was palpable. I caught her snapping at the children more frequently, her patience wearing thin under the pressure. One afternoon, I arrived to find Lila in tears at the kitchen table, a pile of rejected job applications in front of her. I don't understand, she sobbed. I have a degree. Why won't anyone hire me? I sat beside her, offering a tissue. It's been a while since you've worked, Lila. Maybe you need to start smaller, build up some recent experience. She looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed. Like what? Flipping burgers? If that's what it takes, I replied gently. There's no shame in honest work. The children, surprisingly, seemed to be adapting better than their parents. Mia had taken on more responsibility, helping with her younger siblings and even starting to pack lunches. The younger ones had settled into a routine, finding comfort in the stability of school and after-school activities. One evening, I arrived to babysit and found Mia in the kitchen, carefully making sandwiches for the next day. Grandma, she said, not looking up from her task, are Mom and Dad going to be okay? I hugged her tightly, marveling at her maturity. They're trying their best, sweetheart. Sometimes growing up is hard for adults too. As the weeks wore on, the strain began to show in Carter and Lila's relationship. Their arguments became more frequent and heated, often about money or household responsibilities. One night, after putting the kids to bed, I overheard them in the living room. I can't do this anymore, Carter. Lila's voice was shrill with frustration. You're never home, and when you are, you're too exhausted to help with anything. I'm drowning here. What do you want from me, Lila? Carter shot back. I'm busting my ass at a job I hate to keep a roof over our heads. What more can I do? Figure it out. Lila snapped. That's what adults do, right? Isn't that what your parents keep telling us? The silence that followed was deafening. I slipped out quietly, my heart heavy. The next day, Carter called in sick to work. I found him sitting on the front porch, staring blankly into space. I'm failing, Mom, he said as I sat beside him. At work, at home, I'm letting everyone down. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. Carter, nobody succeeds overnight. What matters is that you're trying. That's more than you were doing before. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of desperation and determination. I can't go back to how we were before. I won't. But I don't know how to move forward. One day at a time, I said, squeezing his hand. That's all any of us can do. As I left that evening, I saw Carter and Lila sitting together on the couch, talking quietly. For the first time in weeks, they weren't arguing. It was a small step, but a step nonetheless. Driving home, I felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be tough, but maybe, just maybe, Carter and Lila were starting to find their footing. Little did I know, their greatest challenge was yet to come, and it would test the limits of everything they'd learned so far. The call came on a rainy Tuesday evening. I was just settling in with a cup of tea when my phone lit up with Carter's name. Mom, his voice cracked. We're being evicted. My heart sank, but I steeled myself. What happened, Carter? He broke down, explaining through sobs how they'd fallen behind on rent. They'd been using credit cards to cover expenses, thinking they'd catch up once Lila found steady work. But the debt had spiraled out of control, and now they were facing homelessness. Can you help us? He pleaded. Just this once. I swear we'll pay you back. I closed my eyes, fighting the instinct to rush to his rescue. Carter, I said softly, I can't bail you out of this. You need to figure it out on your own. His response was explosive. Figure it out? We're about to be on the street with 4 kids. How can you be so heartless? As he ranted, I held the phone away from my ear, letting him vent. When he finally quieted, I spoke again. Carter, this is a learning experience. It's hard, but it's necessary. You have resources. Use them. I hung up, my hands shaking. Marcus found me in the kitchen, staring blankly at the wall. Was that Carter? He asked, concern etching his features. I nodded, filling him in on the situation. Did we do the right thing? I whispered, doubt creeping in. Marcus wrapped his arms around me. We did. They need to learn, Lena. It's the only way. The next few days were agonizing. We heard through the grapevine that Carter and Lila were scrambling to find a new place to live. Our phones buzzed constantly with messages from family and friends, some supportive, others critical of our tough love approach. One afternoon, I ran into our neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, at the grocery store. Lena, she said, her voice dripping with faux concern, I heard about Carter and Lila. How could you let this happen to your own grandchildren? I straightened my spine, meeting her gaze. We're teaching them valuable life lessons, Margaret. Sometimes love means letting people face the consequences of their actions. Word of our stance spread through the community like wildfire. To my surprise, many rallied around us. Parents who had struggled with their own adult children reached out, sharing similar stories and offering support. Meanwhile, Carter and Lila faced their crisis head-on. Through mutual friends, we learned they'd managed to find a small, rundown apartment on the outskirts of town. It was far from ideal, but it was a roof over their heads. One evening, about a week after the eviction notice, I received a text from Mia. Grandma, can I call you? My heart raced as I dialed her number. Mia, sweetheart, are you okay? We're okay, she said, her voice small but steady. It's hard, but I think Mom and Dad are trying really hard. Dad's working extra shifts, and Mom got a job at the diner down the street. Tears pricked my eyes as I listened to my granddaughter describe their new living situation. It was cramped and not in the best neighborhood, but they were making it work. Grandma, Mia continued, I know you and Grandpa are trying to help, even if it doesn't feel like it sometimes. I just wanted you to know. I understand. As I hung up, a mix of emotions washed over me. Pride in Mia's maturity, hope for Carter and Lila's growth, and a renewed determination to see this through. The next day, I ran into Carter at the supermarket. He looked exhausted, his cart filled with budget brands and sale items. Our eyes met, and for a moment, I thought he might turn away. But then he approached, his expression a mix of shame and resolve. Mom, he said, his voice rough, I think I get it now. What you and Dad were trying to do. It's hell, but we're learning. I reached out, squeezing his arm gently. You're doing great, Carter. Keep going. As he walked away, I felt a shift in the air. The storm wasn't over, but perhaps we were finally seeing the first rays of sunlight breaking through the clouds. 6 months after the eviction, Marcus and I received an unexpected invitation. Carter and Lila wanted us to visit their new apartment for dinner. As we drove to their place, I felt a mix of anticipation and apprehension. The apartment complex was modest but well-maintained. Carter greeted us at the door, looking more mature than I'd ever seen him. Mom, Dad, he said, embracing us warmly. Thanks for coming. Inside, the small space was tidy and organized. Lila was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of something that smelled delicious. The children were setting the table, chattering excitedly. Welcome, Lila said, wiping her hands on her apron. Dinner's almost ready. As we sat down to eat, I noticed the changes in everyone. The children seemed more responsible, helping without being asked. Carter and Lila moved around each other with a newfound respect and teamwork. Over dinner, Carter cleared his throat. Mom, Dad, we owe you an apology, he began. And a thank you. Lila nodded, reaching for Carter's hand. We were angry at first, she admitted. We felt abandoned. But now we see what you were trying to do. Carter continued. It's been hard, really hard. But we're making it work. I got a promotion at work, and Lila's been taking online classes to update her skills. We're saving money, Lila added. Slowly but surely. We have a budget now, and we stick to it. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. We're so proud of you both, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Marcus nodded, squeezing my hand under the table. You've come a long way. After dinner, as the children cleared the table, Carter pulled us aside. We want you to know, he said softly, that we understand now why you did what you did. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Lila joined us, her eyes shining. We're teaching the kids about responsibility and the value of hard work. We don't want them to make the same mistakes we did. As we prepared to leave, Mia approached us. Grandma, Grandpa, she said, hugging us tightly. Thank you for helping Mom and Dad grow up. On the drive home, Marcus and I sat in comfortable silence, processing the evening. Finally, he spoke. We did the right thing, Lena. I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. We did. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. In the months that followed, we watched from a distance as Carter and Lila continued to grow. They faced challenges, of course, but they met them head-on, working together instead of looking for easy outs. One sunny afternoon, as Marcus and I sat on our porch enjoying our retirement, Carter called. Mom, he said, his voice filled with pride. We did it. We saved enough for a down payment on a small house. I felt my heart swell with joy. That's wonderful, Carter. I'm so proud of you. We couldn't have done it without you and Dad, he said. Your tough love. It saved us. Thank you. As I hung up, I turned to Marcus, tears in my eyes. They're going to be okay, I said, my voice filled with relief and happiness. Marcus pulled me close, kissing the top of my head. They are. And so are we. Looking out at the setting sun, I reflected on our journey. It had been a difficult road, filled with hard choices and painful moments. But in the end, love, real, honest, tough love, had prevailed. Carter and Lila had found their way, not because we rescued them, but because we gave them the space to rescue themselves. They had stumbled and fallen, but they had also learned to pick themselves up. As the sky turned a brilliant orange, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. We had all learned valuable lessons about responsibility, about the true meaning of family, and about the power of standing on your own 2 feet. Our retirement might not have started the way we planned, but it had led us to something far more valuable, a stronger, more resilient family. And as I sat there, hand in hand with Marcus, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I knew that whatever challenges the future might bring, we would face them together, stronger for the storms we had weathered.
My fingers trembled as I stared at Brandon's phone, the bright screen illuminating words that shouldn't exist. 3 years of text messages to someone named Nora. 3 years of I miss you and can't wait to see you, and my wife doesn't understand me. I had to read them twice, 3 times, until the words burned themselves into my brain. I'm Isla, and until 5 minutes ago, I thought I knew what betrayal meant. The kitchen counter felt cold under my palms as I steadied myself. 26 years of marriage reduced to a series of digital love notes and explicit photos. Brandon had left his phone unlocked when he rushed to take that emergency business call in the backyard. Now I knew why he always took those calls outside. Mom, everything okay? Lucas appeared in the doorway, his college graduation photo still prominently displayed on the fridge behind him. My son, perceptive as always. Just checking the time, I lied, sliding the phone back to its exact position on the counter. The muscle memory of covering for Brandon kicked in automatically, even now. Your father's been on that call forever. Lucas crossed his arms, looking so much like his grandfather. My father. In that moment that my chest ached. You're white as a sheet. Must be the lighting. The words came out hollow. Through the window, I could see Brandon pacing near the oak tree, gesturing animatedly. He was wearing the blue shirt I'd ironed this morning, the one I'd bought him for our anniversary last month, the same shirt he wore in one of those photos with her. I should start dinner, I said, but made no move toward the refrigerator. My mind was already racing ahead, calculating. The joint accounts, the farm my parents left us, the life insurance policies. Mom! Lucas's voice was gentle. What did you find? I turned to face my son, this young man who'd grown up watching me smooth things over, make excuses, keep the peace, just like my mother had done, until the day she died. The Thompson women, always protecting their men from consequences. Nothing that wasn't there all along, I said finally. I just wasn't looking. Brandon's laugh drifted through the window, that rich, charming sound that had first drawn me to him at 19, the same laugh he probably used on Nora, 26 years old, the same age I was when Lucas was born. Whatever it is, Lucas said, you don't have to handle it alone. I picked up the knife I'd been using to chop vegetables before Brandon's phone had buzzed with that fatal message. The weight felt good in my hand. Solid. Real. You're right, I said, setting it down carefully. I don't. Brandon's voice grew louder as he approached the back door. I could time it perfectly. 3 steps across the patio, 2 more to the door, then he'd breeze in with some excuse about work, kiss my cheek, and ask what's for dinner, like he had 1,000 times before. But this time would be different. This time I wouldn't smile and nod. This time I thought of my father's words on his deathbed. The farm's yours, Isla. Don't let anyone take what's yours. I heard the back door open. Sorry about that, honey, Brandon called out. You wouldn't believe the day I'm having. I picked up his phone, unlocked it again with the password I wasn't supposed to know, and turned to face the door. Actually, I said, I think I would. The look on his face told me everything I needed to know about the war that was coming, and for the first time in 26 years, I was ready to fight. The next morning, I watched Brandon pack his overnight bag like it was any other business trip. His movements were precise, practiced, the same routine I'd watched for 26 years. Only now I noticed how he checked his phone 3 times while folding a single shirt. The Thompson account needs my personal attention, he said, not meeting my eyes. I'll be back Thursday. I nodded, thinking of the texts I'd seen. Can't wait for our weekend getaway. The timestamp showed Nora had sent it yesterday afternoon. The farm's property taxes are due next week, I said, keeping my voice steady. We should discuss the payment before you leave. Brandon's hand stilled over his suitcase. I thought we agreed to sell the back 40 acres. No, the word came out sharper than I intended. You suggested it. I never agreed. Isla, he used that tone, the one that always made me feel small, unreasonable. The farm's bleeding us dry. Your parents wouldn't want... Don't! My fingers curled around the doorframe. Don't tell me what my parents would want. Lucas appeared in the hallway, coffee mug in hand. The tension in the room hit him like a physical wave. Everything okay? Your mother's being stubborn about the farm again, Brandon said, zipping his bag with unnecessary force. Lucas set his mug down. The farm that puts food on our table? The one that paid for my college? The one that's now worth millions to developers, Brandon countered. We could all retire tomorrow if we betrayed everything my father built? The words escaped before I could stop them. Brandon's head snapped up, eyes narrowing at my choice of words. I need to check the accounts, I continued, softer now. Make sure we have enough for the taxes. I'll handle it. Brandon reached for his laptop bag. Like I always do. No, I stepped forward. I think it's time I took a more active role in our finances. The silence that followed felt like thunder before a storm. Brandon's smile didn't reach his eyes. Honey, you've never shown interest in the business side before. Why start now? Because it's my legacy too. I met his gaze. My name's on those accounts. Lucas moved closer to me, his presence solid and reassuring. I can help, Mom. My degree's in finance, after all. Brandon's laugh held an edge. This isn't a school project, son. No, Lucas replied. It's family. The word hung between us like an accusation. Brandon checked his watch, another practiced gesture I now saw through. We'll discuss this when I return, he said, shouldering his bags. I have a plane to catch. As he headed for the door, I called after him. Brandon, the Thompson account. That wouldn't happen to be in Aspen, would it? He paused, just for a fraction of a second. Denver, why? Just curious. I smiled, thinking of Nora's Instagram post from yesterday. A ski resort tagged in Aspen. Have a safe flight. After he left, Lucas turned to me. Mom? I need you to teach me everything you know about forensic accounting, I said, still staring at the door. And I need you to be discreet about it. Does this have anything to do with what you saw on Dad's phone? I thought of my mother, how she'd kept quiet about my father's struggling farm until it was almost too late. How she'd finally taken charge, saved everything through sheer determination. The steel in her spine when she told my father, "This ends now." This has everything to do with protecting what's ours, I said. Your grandfather didn't build this legacy, so your father could sell it to the highest bidder. Lucas nodded slowly. Or spend it on someone else. My son, too perceptive by half. Get your laptop, I said. We've got 3 days before he returns, and I want to know exactly where every penny has gone. As Lucas disappeared upstairs, I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app. The password Brandon thought I didn't know unlocked 26 years of financial records. Somewhere in those numbers, Nora's footprints would be waiting, and this time, I wouldn't look away. The numbers on Lucas's laptop screen blurred together as midnight approached. 2 days of digging through financial records had left me numb until I saw it, a pattern of transfers to an offshore account, each one timed perfectly with the farm's quarterly profits. He's been doing this for 5 years, Lucas said, his voice tight. Every time the farm turned a profit, he diverted half to this account in the Caymans. I stared at the total, $2.3 million. My father's legacy, draining away like water through cupped hands. There's more, Lucas continued, clicking through documents. The development company interested in the back 40? Dad's been meeting with them for months. He's already signed preliminary paperwork. The betrayal felt physical, like a fist to the stomach. He can't sell without my signature. No, but... Lucas hesitated. Mom, he's been forging your signature on other documents. Small things at first, but recently... A notification popped up on my phone. Brandon's nightly check-in call. I let it ring. Show me everything, I said. Lucas pulled up document after document. My signature, almost perfect but slightly off, appeared on loan applications, property assessments, even a power of attorney I'd never seen. The bank called earlier, Lucas said quietly. They're concerned about unusual activity on the farm's business account. My phone buzzed again. A text from Brandon. Why aren't you answering? Everything okay? I thought of my mother's voice. A Thompson woman knows when to fight. She'd said it the day we discovered my father's cancer, when the medical bills threatened to overwhelm us. She'd fought then, saved the farm, saved us all. We need to move fast, I said. How much can we legally transfer before he returns? Lucas's fingers flew over the keyboard. The farm account's in both your names, but the equipment loan is only in his. If we... A sharp knock at the front door cut him off. Through the window, I saw Walter Thompson's Mercedes in our driveway, its headlights still burning. Uncle Walter? Lucas frowned. It's almost midnight. I stood, smoothing my shirt. Let him in. Walter Thompson filled the doorway like a storm cloud, his expensive suit incongruous in our farmhouse kitchen. Isla, he said, not bothering with pleasantries. Brandon called. Says you're not answering his calls. I've been busy, I replied. Looking at our finances. Something flickered in Walter's eyes. Brandon handles all that. Not anymore. I gestured to Lucas's laptop. Would you like to see what your nephew's been doing with my family's money? Walter stepped closer, his cologne too sharp in the small space. Whatever you think you found, $2.3 million, I cut in, transferred to the Caymans, plus forged signatures, hidden accounts, and a deal to sell land he doesn't fully own. Business is complicated, Walter said, but his confidence wavered. Brandon knows what he's doing. Yes, I agreed. He's stealing from me to fund his new life with Nora Sanders. The same Nora who used to work for your company, the one you fired last year for embezzlement. Walter's face went slack. How did you... I called your secretary. Margaret still likes me, even if you don't. She told me everything about Nora's creative accounting, and now she's got her hooks in Brandon. Lucas stood beside me, shoulder to shoulder. Walter looked between us, calculation replacing shock. What do you want? He asked finally. I thought of Brandon in Aspen, probably celebrating his clever schemes with his young girlfriend. Thought of my father's calloused hands working this land, my mother's quiet strength preserving it. I want what's mine, I said. And I want Brandon to learn what it feels like to lose everything he thought was secure. Walter's laugh was cold. You're going to war with the wrong people, Isla. No, I replied, thinking of the evidence safely backed up on 3 different devices. I'm finally fighting the right ones. As Walter turned to leave, I called after him. Tell Brandon I'll see him Thursday. And Walter? The SEC might be interested in those offshore accounts you helped him set up. The door slammed behind him. Lucas let out a shaky breath. Mom, are you sure about this? I looked at my son, seeing my father's determination in his eyes. Some things are worth burning bridges for. We turned back to the laptop, and I began to type an email to our family lawyer. Thursday was coming, and I had a legacy to protect. The morning before Brandon's return, I found myself in my parents' old bedroom, now my home office. The lawyer's documents lay spread across my mother's antique desk, each page outlining a different betrayal. Loan applications, property liens, forged signatures. My phone buzzed. Another message from Brandon. Coming home early. We need to talk. A familiar perfume bottle caught my eye, still sitting on the dresser where my mother left it. The day before she died, she'd told me, sometimes the hardest part isn't discovering the truth, it's deciding what to do with it. Lucas appeared in the doorway, his laptop in hand. Mom, you need to see this. He pulled up an email chain between Brandon and the developers. The most recent message made my blood run cold. Once the property transfers are complete, we'll proceed with the full acquisition. Mrs. Thompson's signature won't be an issue. There's more, Lucas said, scrolling down. They're not just after the back 40. They want the whole farm. And Dad, he's already promised it to them. The room seemed to tilt. When? The final meeting's scheduled for next week. They're offering $30 million. I touched my mother's perfume bottle, remembering how she'd fought to keep this land when the banks threatened foreclosure. Show me the rest. Lucas hesitated. Mom, maybe we should wait. Show me. He pulled up another document. A prenuptial agreement I'd never seen, dated 3 weeks ago. Brandon's name. Nora's name. A property division that left me with nothing. The doorbell rang downstairs. That's probably Margaret, Lucas said. She said she had more documents from Uncle Walter's office. I'll get it. But when I opened the door, Nora Sanders stood on my porch. She wore expensive clothes that tried too hard, jewelry that sparkled too bright. Young, beautiful, and utterly calculated. Mrs. Thompson, she said, her smile perfect and practiced. I think it's time we talked. I should have slammed the door. Instead, I stepped aside. Come in. She walked into my house like she already owned it, her heels clicking on the hardwood floors my father had installed. Lucas appeared at the top of the stairs, his face darkening when he saw our visitor. I'll make coffee, he said, his tone making it clear he'd stay close. Nora settled onto our couch, the one Brandon and I had picked out together 15 years ago. I assume you know who I am. I know what you are. I remained standing. The question is, why are you here? To make a deal. She opened her designer bag, pulled out a folder. Brandon doesn't know I'm here. He thinks charm and manipulation will handle everything. Men usually do. I thought of Walter's warning about going to war with the wrong people. What kind of deal? The kind where you walk away with dignity and $10 million. She slid the folder across the coffee table. Better than fighting a losing battle, don't you think? I picked up the folder but didn't open it. And if I refuse? Then things get ugly. Her smile never wavered. Brandon's not the only one who knows how to forge signatures. One wrong move and you'll lose everything, including your son's trust when certain documents come to light. The threat hung in the air like smoke. From the kitchen doorway, Lucas watched, his hands gripping his laptop like a shield. I thought of my father's words. Don't let anyone take what's yours. But he'd never faced someone like Nora. Young, ruthless, and holding all the cards. Or so she thought. I opened the folder, scanned the contents, then carefully set it down. Interesting offer, but you made one mistake. Oh? Her confidence flickered just slightly. You assumed Brandon told you everything. I pulled out my phone, showed her the email I'd received that morning from the SEC. Did he mention the federal investigation? Or that I've been cooperating with them for the past 2 days? The color drained from her perfect face. In the kitchen, Lucas smiled. The war wasn't over. But for the first time, I knew exactly who my enemies were and how to fight them. Brandon's homecoming dinner filled our dining room with artificial warmth. He'd brought expensive wine, arranged flowers on the table, playing the role of devoted husband while his phone buzzed silently in his pocket. Probably Nora, warning him about our meeting. The Thompson account went well, he said, cutting into his steak. We should celebrate this weekend. Maybe drive up to the lake house? Lucas caught my eye across the table. The lake house, another asset Brandon had secretly mortgaged, according to the documents we'd found. Actually, I said, I was thinking we should host the harvest dinner here this year, like my parents always did. Brandon's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Honey, we haven't done that in years. Exactly. Time to revive some traditions. I took a sip of wine. I've already invited the whole family, even Uncle Walter. The color drained from Brandon's face so quickly, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. That's not a good idea, he said carefully. With the farm's financial situation, I've been looking into that. I kept my voice light, casual. Found some interesting transactions. The accountant's coming tomorrow to go through everything. Brandon's knuckles whitened around his fork. I handle the finances. Not anymore. I set down my glass. The SEC called again today. They had some questions about offshore accounts. The silence that followed felt like glass about to shatter. Lucas pushed back his chair. I should check on those spreadsheets, he said, leaving us alone. Brandon waited until Lucas's footsteps faded upstairs. Whatever you think you know, I know everything. I pulled out my phone, showed him the prenup he'd drafted with Nora. Your girlfriend's quite the negotiator, but she should have asked more questions about those accounts before threatening me. Isla. His charm switched on like a light. Let me explain. The harvest dinner's Saturday. Everyone will be here. The family, the bank managers, even those developers you've been meeting with. I stood, gathering the plates. You have 3 days to decide how this ends. He grabbed my wrist, hard enough to hurt. You're making a mistake! No! I twisted free, feeling something inside me harden. I made my mistake 26 years ago when I married you. His phone buzzed again. This time, he checked it. Nora's getting nervous, isn't she? I asked. Wondering if her investment in you is about to collapse? Brandon stood so quickly his chair toppled backward. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Actually, I do. I thought of my mother's strength, my father's integrity. I'm dealing with a coward who tried to steal my family's legacy, and I'm done being quiet about it. He moved toward me, but Lucas appeared in the doorway. Everything okay, Mom? Brandon's mask slipped back into place. Just a disagreement about the harvest dinner. Right, Lucas said. The one where Mom's planning to show everyone the forensic accounting reports? The threat hung between us like smoke. Brandon's jaw clenched. This isn't over, he said quietly. No, I agreed. But it will be on Saturday. After he stormed out, Lucas helped me clear the table. He'll try something before Saturday. I'm counting on it. I picked up Brandon's discarded napkin, noticed how his hands had shaken enough to tear it. That's why I made copies of everything. Lucas paused. Mom? What aren't you telling me? I thought of the other documents I'd found, the ones showing Walter's company was on the verge of collapse, taking Brandon's secret investments with it. The evidence of years of tax fraud that would destroy them both. Just remember what Grandpa always said, I told him. The truth has a way of harvesting itself. Outside, Brandon's car engine roared to life. He was probably heading straight to Nora, or maybe Walter, trying to salvage his carefully constructed lies. Let him run. Let him plot. Saturday was coming, and I had seeds of my own to harvest. The harvest dinner table stretched before me like a battlefield. Brandon sat at one end, Walter at the other, both wearing practiced smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Between them, our guests chatted over my mother's old china, oblivious to the storm about to break. Nora hadn't shown up. Her absence spoke louder than her presence ever could. The farms never look better, Walter announced, raising his glass. Brandon tells me you're considering some exciting new developments. My hand tightened around the USB drive in my pocket. Lucas caught my eye from across the table, giving a subtle nod. The projector was ready in the study. Actually, I started, but Brandon cut me off. We should discuss business later, he said smoothly. Tonight's about family. The word family hit like a slap. I thought of the email I'd received an hour ago, proof that Brandon had already transferred the farm's deed to a shell corporation. He'd forged my signature one final time, betting I wouldn't dare expose him publicly. Speaking of family, Walter continued, I have an announcement. Brandon's being promoted to CEO of Thompson Industries, effective immediately. The table erupted in congratulations. Brandon's smile turned triumphant as he accepted handshakes and praise. Only Lucas and I remained silent. A toast, Walter declared, to the new face of Thompson Industries. I stood, my chair scraping against the hardwood. Before we celebrate, there's something everyone should see. Brandon's face hardened. Isla, don't. The SEC investigation, I began, but suddenly every phone at the table buzzed simultaneously. Brandon's smile widened as our guests checked their phones. I pulled out mine, feeling the blood drain from my face. Breaking news. Thompson Industries announces merger with Global Development Corp. Stock soars. As I was saying, Walter continued, this promotion comes with some changes. The farm property has been acquired as part of the merger. Full market value, of course. My hands shook. That's impossible. I never signed. Check your email, Brandon said quietly. You signed everything last month, don't you remember? The forged documents. He'd backdated them all, created a paper trail so perfect it would take months to prove the fraud. Months we didn't have. You have until Monday to vacate, Walter added. The developers start work next week. Lucas stood. Mom, show them the evidence, the offshore accounts, What evidence? Brandon pulled out a familiar USB drive, identical to the one in my pocket. This evidence? My blood ran cold as I pulled out my drive. It was blank, wiped clean. Somewhere in the house, during the dinner preparations, they'd made the switch. Your mother's been under tremendous stress lately, Brandon told the table, imagining all sorts of conspiracies. We've arranged for her to take some time off, get the help she needs. The room spun. They'd planned this perfectly. Discredit me before I could expose them. Make any accusations seem like the ravings of a desperate woman. You can't, I started, but Walter raised his hand. Please, he said to our guests. Give us a moment with family. As people filed out, Brandon approached me. I warned you not to play games you don't understand. The SEC has closed their investigation. Amazing what the right connections can do. Lucas moved to stand beside me, but Brandon blocked his path. Son, your mother needs professional help. We've arranged everything. Like you arranged Nora? Lucas snapped. Brandon's smile never wavered. Nora's been transferred overseas. A generous promotion, in exchange for her discretion. I thought of my parents, how they'd fought to keep this land, how I'd failed them. Monday morning, Walter said firmly. The developers arrive at 9. They left us there, Lucas and me, standing in my mother's dining room for what would be the last time. Through the window I could see the farm stretching out under the harvest moon. 26 years of marriage, generations of family history, all slipping away like water through my fingers. Lucas touched my arm. Mom, get me Margaret on the phone, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, and find out everything you can about Global Development Corp. They'd taken my evidence, my home, my reputation. But they'd forgotten one thing. A Thompson woman knows how to survive a harsh harvest, and I wasn't finished reaping what they'd sown. Sunday morning, I sat in my father's old truck outside Thompson Industries, watching Brandon and Walter arrive for their victory lap. They'd scheduled a press conference to announce the merger, complete with plans for the farm's redevelopment. My phone buzzed. Margaret's text. Files sent. God help them. Lucas pulled up beside me, parking his car. Nora's flight landed an hour ago. And? She went straight to the SEC office, just like you said she would. I checked my watch. The press conference would start in 20 minutes. Brandon and Walter would be preparing their speeches, savoring their triumph. They'd never see it coming. Inside, the lobby buzzed with reporters and shareholders. Brandon stood at the center, radiating charm, while Walter worked the crowd. Their eyes widened when they saw me. Isla, Brandon moved to intercept me. This is a private event. Nothing about Thompson Industries is private anymore. I handed him a tablet. Check your company's stock price. His face went ash gray as he read the breaking news. SEC launches criminal investigation into Thompson Industries merger. Whistleblower reveals massive fraud. Walter snatched the tablet. What did you do? Me? Nothing. I smiled. But Nora, she had quite a story to tell once she realized you'd frozen her offshore accounts. Brandon's charm cracked. You're bluffing. Check your email. Margaret sent some interesting documents this morning. Turns out your trusted secretary kept copies of everything. Reporters were noticing the tension, drifting closer. Walter grabbed my arm. Security will remove you. Before or after they see this? Lucas stepped forward, holding up his phone. A video played. Brandon and Walter in the study during the harvest dinner, discussing the forged documents, the fake merger, the plan to commit securities fraud. You bugged my house, Brandon whispered. No. I met his eyes. I bugged my house. The one you tried to steal. Cameras were turning our way now. Walter's face had gone from red to purple. Whatever you think you have is already with the FBI. I raised my voice slightly, letting the reporters hear. Along with proof of tax fraud, forged documents, and evidence of how you bankrupted your last 3 companies. Brandon lunged for Lucas's phone, but security moved in. Not to remove me, but to contain the situation. The crowd was growing, phones recording everything. You can't prove, Walter started, but his phone rang. His face crumpled as he listened. When he hung up, he looked ancient. The board, he said to Brandon. They're calling an emergency meeting. The merger's dead. Brandon's mask finally shattered. You stupid bitch. You've destroyed everything. No! I thought of my mother's strength, my father's integrity. I protected what's mine. The farm stays in the family. The only thing destroyed is your illusion of power. Mrs. Thompson? A FBI agent appeared, flanked by others. We need to speak with Mr. Thompson and Mr. Thompson? As they were led away, Brandon turned back. I gave you everything you have. No, I said quietly. You tried to take everything I earned. There's a difference. The press swarmed as Brandon and Walter were escorted out. Lucas put his arm around my shoulders. Mom, you okay? I watched my husband of 26 years disappear into a federal vehicle, thinking of all the quiet dinners, the subtle manipulations, the years of making myself small to make him feel big. The farm needs attention, I said finally. Harvest season's not over. Outside, reporters shouted questions about the scandal, the investigation, the millions in fraudulent deals. But all I could think about was the autumn wind on my face, the smell of earth after rain, and my father's words, "The land remembers who loves it." Brandon had forgotten that. He'd forgotten that real power isn't in boardrooms or bank accounts. It's in the quiet strength of people who know their worth. Let's go home, I told Lucas. There's work to be done. Behind us, Thompson Industries crumbled. But ahead, across the fields my parents had preserved, a different kind of harvest waited. One built on truth, not lies, on legacy, not greed. And this time, I'd be the one tending it. The divorce papers lay unsigned on my mother's antique desk, next to the morning's newspaper. The headline still caught my eye. Thompson Industries executives face federal charges. Brandon's corporate headshot stared back at me, his practiced smile now a reminder of all the lies I'd believed. Through the window, I watched Lucas directing the harvest crew across the back 40, the land Brandon had tried so hard to take. The autumn sun caught the golden wheat, making it look like waves of light. My phone buzzed. Nora's name appeared on the screen. I'm not testifying, she said without preamble. Brandon's lawyers offered a deal. I figured they would. I traced my finger along the desk's worn edge, remembering my mother doing the same when making difficult decisions. But you should know, the SEC already has everything they need. A long pause. He said you'd say that. He says a lot of things, Nora. That's why we're both here. The line went dead. Through the window, I saw Lucas wave to someone, Margaret, arriving with another stack of documents. She'd been instrumental in exposing Walter's long history of fraud, earning herself immunity in the process. The doorbell rang. I knew who it would be. Brandon stood on our porch, my porch now, looking smaller somehow. The designer suit was gone, replaced by department store clothes that didn't quite fit. The prosecutors offered a plea deal, he said. I know. 5 years instead of 20. He shifted, uncomfortable in his new reality. If you speak on my behalf. I thought of all the nights I'd spent going through records, tracking his deceptions, protecting what was mine. No. Isla. The farm's latest harvest report. I cut him off, holding out a folder. You'll need it for the asset division. He took it, frowning as he read. His face changed as he understood. These profits, they're higher than anything you ever reported, I corrected. Amazing what happens when you actually invest in the land instead of trying to sell it. The sound of tractors filled the silence between us. Lucas and the crew were bringing in the last of the wheat, just as my father had taught me to do. I never understood this place, Brandon said finally. What it meant to you. No, I agreed. You didn't. He pulled out a pen, signed the divorce papers without reading them. His hand shook slightly. Walter made a deal, he said. He's testifying against me. Like father, like son. The words came out sharper than I intended. Brandon flinched. I really thought I could make you understand. About Nora, about the business. You thought you could make me small enough to fit into your world. I took the signed papers. But I was never the one who needed to grow. He looked past me into the house. Our house once. Now just another thing he'd lost by trying to possess it. What will you do now? He asked. I thought of the agricultural college's proposal sitting on my desk. They wanted to use the farm as a teaching facility, combining traditional methods with sustainable innovation. Lucas had already drawn up the business plan. I'll do what my parents did, I said. Plant seeds and watch them grow. After he left, I walked out to the wheat field. Lucas saw me coming, jumped down from the tractor. Everything okay? I handed him the signed papers. It is now. The wind carried the scent of earth and harvest, just as it had when I was a girl learning at my father's knee. But now there was something else in it, the promise of change, of growth. Mom? Lucas pointed to the horizon. Storm's coming. I watched the clouds gather, thinking of all the storms we'd weathered here, all the ones yet to come. Good, I said. The land could use the rain. We stood together, watching the wheat bend in the wind. Behind us, the farmhouse stood steady, its foundations deeper than any corporate tower. And in my pocket, the key to it all weighed exactly as much as it should, heavy with responsibility, light with freedom. The first drops began to fall.
Just look at that, I exclaimed, staring at the electricity bill in disbelief. $327.38, nearly double what we usually pay. Outrageous. I'd always prided myself on budgeting carefully, tracking every expense down to the last penny. My passion was collecting limited edition desserts, and I indulged whenever I could. So for the bill to suddenly skyrocket made no sense. That can't be right, Neil replied, peering over my shoulder with a frown. My supportive husband was always on my side. We haven't changed any habits recently. Well, something caused this. I grabbed my laptop to scrutinize the household usage data. No obvious spikes. Perplexed, I gazed out the window and stopped short. There, peeking out from beneath the decorative bushes separating our house from Neil's parents' new home next door, was a wire, thin and black, snaking towards their shed. Surely just a cable line? But we had underground connections. A horrible suspicion crossed my mind. No, it wasn't possible. Was it? Just last month, Neil's parents Vera and Hank had moved into the newly constructed house on the lot beside ours. Neil and I had welcomed them warmly despite Vera's tendency to overstep with unsolicited parenting advice. I'd written it off as her quirky way of showing warmth. But now... Neil, look! I gestured out the window. As he spotted the wire, his eyebrows shot up. Without a word, we stepped outside, circling the bushes to trace the wire's path. It ran directly from our external outlet to Vera and Hank's shed. Our mouths fell open as we exchanged stunned looks. No way, Neil uttered in disbelief. They can't be. Anger and hurt welled up inside me. They'd seemed so friendly, so supportive. Had it all been an act? Just then, the back door of their house opened. Vera breezed out carrying gardening shears, calling over her shoulder, "Be back in a minute!" Spotting us, she changed course, bearing down with her usual overbright smile, the one I now realized never reached her eyes. "Well, hi there, neighbors," she trilled. "Taking in this beautiful sunny day?" I crossed my arms. No more playing nice while she played us for fools. "We were just investigating something strange," I said bluntly, stepping aside so she could see the wire. "Would you happen to know anything about this?" Vera's gaze bounced from me to the wire and back again. For a brief moment, her smile faltered, but then she waved a hand and laughed. Oh, that old thing. The builders must have left it behind. Even to me, the excuse sounded feeble. She trailed off under my stern gaze. Neil stepped forward, fists clenching. Have you been stealing our electricity, using this wire to tap into our supply? His voice shook with anger and betrayal. Vera reeled back. What? How dare you? She glared venomously. I was just trying to cut costs. Our retirement budget is stretched thin. Surely you understand. At that, the floodgates opened. I lost my composure, shouting at her audacity. Neil joined me, demanding answers about the ethics of stealing from family. She alternated between righteous indignation and half-hearted apologies. The confrontation left me reeling and even more hurt than before. That evening, after Vera had retreated in a huff, Neil held me as I cried bitter tears over the shattered remains of what I'd thought was a supportive, loving family relationship. How could they betray us like this, and what else might they be hiding? I couldn't even bear to tally up how much they could have stolen over the past month. Hundreds of dollars we'd worked hard for, callously snatched away without a thought for how it would impact us. Gazing at our electricity bill later that night, I set my jaw. The Vera and Hank I thought I knew would never do something so underhanded, which meant I'd never actually known them at all. The realization stung, but it sparked a steely determination within me. No more playing nice while they took advantage and sabotaged our carefully balanced budget. If this was their opening salvo, then the battle lines had just been drawn. I would get to the bottom of this and make them pay. I awoke the next morning still simmering from yesterday's confrontation. As I gulped my morning coffee, I kept replaying Vera's audacious lies and excuses. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. A knock at the front door made me jump. Speak of the devil. I peered out to see Vera standing there clutching a plate of cookies, an overly bright smile pasted on. Just seeing her made my blood boil even hotter. I swung open the door. What do you want? I asked bluntly. Vera blinked, clearly taken aback by my lack of pleasantries. Good. Her smile dimmed a fraction. Oh, Lena, about yesterday. She extended the plate. I baked these by way of apology. I stared at the offering in disgust. Did she really think cookies would make everything better? When I made no move to take them, she pressed on earnestly. It was all just a silly misunderstanding. I never meant any harm, truly. Misunderstanding? My fists clenched by my sides. This woman's audacity knew no bounds. You mean when you deliberately tapped into our electricity supply to avoid paying your fair share? I bit out. Vera frowned, dropping the act. Oh, don't be so self-righteous. Our budget is extremely tight. We're just cutting costs where we can. By stealing from us? From your own son? How could you? We trusted you. My raised voice brought Neil from the other room. I felt him come stand supportively beside me. Vera flushed. Now see here, you two are blowing this out of proportion. Can't we talk civilly about this over some cookies? She offered the plate again with a conciliatory smile, but I'd had enough. Taking the plate from her, I upended it onto the doormat. Cookies scattered everywhere as Vera gasped. There! Take back your lies and excuses. I glared venomously. We will not be placated so easily. As I slammed the door in her astonished face, I felt a small spark of vicious satisfaction. There, let her see I wasn't messing around. Over the next few days, Vera's intrusions multiplied, stoking my simmering resentment. She popped by nearly every day with unwanted gifts and advice about everything from our spending habits to refrigerator organization. Each visit grated on me more. The final straw came when I spotted her letting herself in our back gate one morning. Marching outside, I confronted her sneaking around near our fuse box. She claimed she was just checking the wiring, but I knew she was scoping out ways to restore her illegal supply. Enraged, I changed the locks and gate code. When Neil suggested leaving a key with his parents just in case of emergency, I shot that down fast. Give them an inch, they'd take 10 miles. Clearly, they refused to respect boundaries. Well, if politeness wouldn't get through, then it was time to play hardball. Over dinner with Neil that night, I revealed my plan. We need evidence before going to the electric company or police. I'm going to set up a surveillance camera covering that fuse box. That should capture any further attempts. Neil frowned nervously. Isn't that a bit aggressive? They're still my parents. I fixed him with an adamant stare. They committed theft without batting an eye. I warned you they'd take advantage of any wiggle room we give them. It's time to take a stand. Neil's shoulders slumped. You're right, I just wish it hadn't come to this. I knew he was still clinging to hope of reconciling with them, but sentimentality would get us nowhere against such conniving adversaries. The very next morning, the camera captured Vera skulking by our fuse box, clearly probing for a way to reconnect. Gotcha! I added the video to the growing evidence file. When she caught me installing a motion-activated floodlight days later, Vera went pale. I maintained steely eye contact until she hurried away without a word. Good. Let her sweat a little. She was quickly learning her tricks wouldn't work on me. Soon we'd have enough documentation to bring down the full consequences on her deceitful head. She'd rue the day she ever thought she could walk all over me without retaliation. By the time I was through, karma would bite back hard for her lies and manipulation. This was only the opening salvo. The real fireworks were still to come. Over the next week, I became obsessed with monitoring Vera's activity and tracking our electricity usage. I knew something didn't add up there and was determined to get to the bottom of things. Sure enough, one morning the motion detector notifications showed Vera skulking around our yard in the early hours. The floodlight switched on, illuminating her heading towards the back gate with wire cutters in hand. Smirking, I swung open the back door. Forget the locks, Vera? Or were you hoping to override my security system? She jolted, hiding the cutters behind her back. Lena, I was just, checking the wiring connections back here. I stepped forward, glaring daggers. Save it. I've got you on camera trying to break in and poach our supply again. Vera straightened defiantly. You can't prove anything. I'm well within my rights to check wiring on my property. The only thing you have a right to do is stay the hell away from our house, I shouted. Give me those. I lunged for the cutters, but she dodged me. We struggled briefly before she wrenched away, lips curled in a sneer. Have it your way, then. But this isn't over. I promise you that. She turned and stormed off. Seething, I relocked the gate and rearmed the security system. How far would that deranged woman go? Over the next few days, Vera kept her distance. But my anger simmered, erupting one evening when our latest electricity bill arrived. I tore open the envelope and scanned the total, $412.60. What? I exploded, making Neil jump. Even after locking them out, it keeps getting higher. Neil's forehead creased with worry. Are you sure the motion lights aren't causing it? I shook my head firmly. I've accounted for every variable. Something fishy is still going on here. Suddenly the doorbell rang. We exchanged wary glances before Neil opened it to reveal Hank standing there, shuffling nervously. We need to talk, he mumbled, not quite meeting our eyes. It's about the wiring issues. I crossed my arms, steeling myself. Go on, then. Hank cleared his throat. Vera wants to bury the hatchet, and we'd like a key made just in case you two are ever unavailable and an emergency repair is needed. My temper flared again. Give them access after everything? Not a chance. I jabbed a finger at Hank's chest. You mean give you free rein to keep tapping our power? Hank backed away, protesting. Neil quickly intervened before things escalated further. After Hank retreated in a huff, Neil gave me a serious look. We can't keep fighting them like this. What if we sit down civilly and try to sort this out? I bit my lip, considering. As much as I hated to admit it, maybe we did need an open conversation before things spiraled irrevocably out of control. So a few days later, Vera and Hank sat stiffly on our couch while Neil mediated. I stated my case bluntly. The unchecked electricity drainage had to stop, or we'd take legal action. Vera alternated between superficial apologies and rambling excuses, while Hank stared at the floor. Eventually, Neil negotiated a tenuous truce. We'd refrain from formal complaints if the electrical issues ceased immediately. After they left, Neil gave me a pleading look. Let's give them one last chance before escalating this further. Though it grated on me, I reluctantly agreed. One final opportunity to make things right, before my vengeance hammer fell with full righteous fury. In the following days, I still patrolled for suspicious activity, but when our next bill showed only a marginal increase, I allowed my guard to lower slightly. Maybe they were actually holding up their end for once. Either way, the surveillance would continue. I wouldn't be fooled again by their facade. Soon I'd know if this truce was genuine, or merely the quiet before their next brazen attack. I awoke one morning to find Neil already up, pacing worriedly. Wordlessly, he handed me the latest electricity bill, $492.79. I saw red. It was even higher than the first shocking amount. Despite all my precautions, I slammed the paper down. I knew it. They blatantly lied about stopping their deceitful schemes. It's time to bring down the hammer on them. Neil wrung his hands anxiously. Shouldn't we confirm it's actually them first? Oh, it's them all right, I fumed. Now we're getting the electric company involved to trace this. Whipping out my phone, I called to demand an urgent investigation. The following afternoon, I escorted the technician towards our fuse box, scanning for any sight of Vera and Hank. If they caught wind of this inspection, there'd be hell to pay. Luckily, their house appeared silent. The tech removed the box cover, examining the interior wiring with a practiced eye. As he shifted to inspect the ground wire connections, he paused. Well, that shouldn't be there. I hurried over to see him tugging on a cable that had been very deliberately wired into our supply line. My fists clenched with rage. Gotcha! I knew they couldn't resist resuming their illegal connections. Their audacity knew no bounds. The technician shook his head. You've got a tap wire spliced directly into your power. Draining it right off, too. He traced the cable behind our bushes. Looks like that house next door. I threw my hands up furiously. I knew it. Those lying snakes swore they'd stop stealing from us. Wait until I expose their thievery to the whole neighborhood. I whirled to storm next door and confront them, but Neil grabbed my shoulders gently. We have solid evidence now. Let's make a plan first before charging over there. I took a deep breath, wrestling my temper back under control. He was right. As satisfying as a verbal lashing would feel, it would likely only spawn more lies and denial. Better to retain the element of surprise for now. The technician cleared his throat awkwardly. If you'd like to file charges, I can provide documentation on the unauthorized wiring setup here. I gave a sharp nod. Yes, we absolutely want to pursue this legally. Justice would be served soon enough. That night after dinner, Neil and I strategized our next moves. In addition to pressing charges, I suggested blasting their thievery across neighborhood Facebook groups. Once everyone knows what duplicitous fraudsters they are, they'll be social outcasts. Avoiding jail is the least of what they deserve. I slammed my hand on the table for emphasis. Neil bit his lip nervously. I agree they need to face consequences, but public shaming seems extreme. I leaned forward adamantly. After all the warnings and second chances, I will flaunt their shame so widely they'll never show their faces around here again. Neil still looked hesitant about my scorched earth approach, but the die was cast. After tomorrow's confrontation, one way or another, Vera and Hank would regret the day they ever targeted me as an easy victim for their deception. The next evening, I turned off all our outdoor lights and ensured the motion detectors were disabled. Under cover of darkness, the technician arrived to sever and remove Vera and Hank's parasitic connection. Phase 1 of retaliation was complete. At sunrise, after double-checking the cables had been separated, I dialed the police dispatcher with Neil beside me. My hand tremored slightly as I reported the extensive wire fraud next door. But my voice remained steady, fueled by white-hot indignation. I wanted to witness Vera and Hank's reactions firsthand when the police showed up to investigate. But Neil convinced me to lay low to avoid prematurely tipping them off. So we watched discreetly through the window as first one, then 2 squad cars rolled up outside their house. As the officers knocked and presented a search warrant, I hugged myself tight, almost dizzy with vicious satisfaction. Got them. After all the lies and manipulation, their web of deception was unraveling before my eyes. Soon they'd be facing criminal charges, and once word spread about their shady exploits grifting naive neighbors, their remaining reputation would be left in tatters too. I finally exhaled, feeling the knots of tension start to loosen within me. The confrontation would come soon enough, but for now I'd scored a decisive victory against their underhanded scheming. Watching the police continue scouring Vera and Hank's home for illicit connections, I allowed myself a small smug smile. Justice was finally at hand. In the aftermath of the police visit, an uneasy quiet descended on our normally peaceful neighborhood. I kept vigilant watch out the window as whispers spread about Vera and Hank's shady wiring scam. When curious neighbors knocked to probe us for details, I remained tight-lipped. Let the authorities handle things from here. Though it took immense self-restraint not to blast Vera's misdeeds from the rooftops myself, I waited to see how the investigation unfolded. Sure enough, a few days later, Neil spotted a certified letter in their mailbox, addressed from the county clerk's office. Subpoena for evidence, no doubt. The wheels of justice were turning. My smug satisfaction only grew when I peered out the window later to see Vera emerging red-eyed and distressed from a shouting match with Hank. She must be waking up to the severity of the charges they faced, with their little larceny scheme unraveling fast. As I watched her hurry tearfully back inside, I couldn't suppress a vicious smirk. Where were her snide excuses and haughty denials now that hard proof had been found? Serves her right. Maybe the threat of jail time would make her reflect on toying with decent, law-abiding folks. The sight stirred conflicting emotions in Neil, though. That night over dinner, his brow remained deeply furrowed. Do you think I should try talking to them?" he suggested tentatively. "Plead for leniency with the DA before an indictment comes down?" My hand clenched furiously around my fork. Lenient? Is that what their deceit and manipulation warranted? When they'd shown no mercy towards our hard-earned money or trust in family bonds? Taking a deep breath to rein in my outrage, I fixed Neil with a stern look. "You can't protect them from what's coming. Don't let misplaced guilt sway you from the facts." He looked away, jaw tight. I knew seeing his parents suffer pained him on some level. But the time for sympathy was long past. The next morning brought a new development, a large for sale sign staked outside Vera and Hank's house. Peering out as a startled neighbor walked by, I understood immediately. They were trying to liquidate fast and hightail it out of here before the hammer fell. Well, not if I had anything to say about it. Storming outside in my bathrobe, I waved wildly to stop the passing couple gawking at the sign. Time for some strategic gossip-mongering. "A shame about those electrical thieves leaving already, isn't it?" I commented conversationally. I would have loved to see them in handcuffs getting dragged off to prison myself. The wife's eyes boggled. Mission accomplished. That juicy tidbit would spread quickly now. Let's see anyone make offers once word got out they were flight risks awaiting criminal charges. I strode back inside with grim satisfaction, already formulating my next moves. Vera and Hank had avoided me long enough. It was time we finally talked openly. Soon Neil and I stood firmly at their front door as I rapped sharply. When Vera answered, surprise flashed across her face before she schooled her features carefully neutral. "Lena, Neil, to what do I owe the pleasure?" Her polite tone held an unmistakable note of wariness. I folded my arms severely. "You know exactly why. We're here to talk things over." Vera eyed me for a long, silent moment before reluctantly backing up in wordless invitation. As we stepped inside and sat on their couch, I inspected Vera closely. She seemed diminished somehow, worn and haggard in a way that had nothing to do with physical age. The gnawing anxiety was clear in her dull eyes and tense posture. Good, let her squirm. I had zero intentions of showing mercy. Not until she fully acknowledged her lies and made proper amends. Settling back with arms still crossed, I pinned her with an icy stare. "Well then, let's chat frankly now about recent events, shall we?" Her hands twisted together nervously. "Yes, Vera. Face the music at last." In the days following Vera and Hank's dramatic arrest, the neighborhood gossip mill churned faster than ever before. Supportive friends stopped by, eager for updates while casting disdain on that awful thieving couple. I remained discreet with details, but made sure everyone knew they'd admitted guilt to us directly. Let Vera's illusions of sympathy for her plight be crushed. Neil busied himself advocating for leniency, against my advice. She still deserves imprisonment for the betrayal of family, I argued hotly. Neil just sighed. Harsh sentences won't undo the damage, though. Though it irked me letting Vera off lightly, Neil's pure heart wouldn't wish crushing punishment on anyone. A week later, Neil got an update call from Vera's lawyer. In exchange for testimony on other neighborhood scam incidents, she'd gotten off with probation and heavy court fees. I scowled angrily at the news. A light slap on the wrist. Where was the justice for nearly $1,000 stolen from us over numerous months? Storming outside that afternoon to retrieve the mail, I paused, seeing Hank shuffling forlornly around their for sale sign. His worn complexion and disheveled appearance testified to many sleepless, stressful nights since their crimes had come to light. Good. Let the weight of consequences torment them a while longer. Skirting widely around Hank, I went back inside, feeling sour. Neil tried reassuring me again. She's banned from our property at least, plus the public shaming. Isn't that enough? My temper flared. Hardly. That woman slithered out of any real punishment for her misdeeds. Well, we shall see. I wasn't done with Vera yet. Time for the next phase. Ensuing, she fully paid her karmic debts. Using contacts I had in the county clerk's office, I quietly pursued getting the case evidence released publicly. And I began judiciously leaking additional gossip about Vera's long history of shady dealings. Let the full spotlight expose her deceit for all to revile. Soon enough, muckraking local reporters came sniffing at my prompts. I watched with smug satisfaction as the first scathing exposés skewering shameless schemester Vera hit the presses. As if on cue, my phone pinged with a neighborhood watch alert. Vera had been spotted yelling tearfully at a reporter to leave her alone. Music to my ears. Clearly, the non-stop public harassment was taking its toll. Over dinner, I showed Neil the alert triumphantly. Now she's getting a taste of consequences beyond the courthouse. But instead of matching my fierce grin, Neil paled. This seems less like justice and more just cruelty now, he said quietly. She's clearly paid for her crimes already. I smacked my hand down furiously. How can you say that? Mere fines and hand slaps while she sobs about harassment. I won't rest until she fully understands the pain her deceit caused. Neil just gazed at me sorrowfully. Stung, I turned away. Why couldn't he see I was protecting us from further exploitation? The next morning brought a new bombshell. I spotted a local real estate item announcing Vera and Hank's house had sold for a fraction of its value after sitting unpurchased for weeks. Ha! Undoubtedly the non-stop media spotlight had scared away any serious buyers. Sweet justice. Perhaps the financial blow would finally dent Vera's defiant spirit. Sure enough, later that day a moving truck rolled up outside their house. I watched with vicious satisfaction as a weary, broken-looking Vera supervised movers hauling shabby boxes out to the truck unassisted by any friends or family. In her expression of utter defeat, I recognized the bitter taste of karmic retribution at last. She was getting every bit of what she deserved. Soon I'd be fully rid of her deceptions and delusions of grandeur for good. Let her start over penniless and friendless elsewhere. As the moving truck finally pulled away, exhaust fumes momentarily obscuring Vera's face, I lifted my chin in cold triumph. I'd won. In the weeks after Vera and Hank's ignominious exit, the neighborhood gossip mill continued churning. But with the primary culprits gone, intrigue gradually faded. Soon talk turned to more mundane matters, and benign normalcy returned to our quiet corner of suburbia. Neil and I gradually adjusted back to our familiar routines free of toxic drama. With our backyard now a serene vista instead of an anxiety minefield, my guarded hypervigilance eased. I took smug satisfaction seeing new friendly neighbors move into Vera's former house, restoring community spirit. One afternoon while gardening, I made casual small talk with them about selecting new fence plants without the old electrical complications. Goodness, we'd heard rumors the previous residents were problematic, the wife said, eyes round. Something about stealing utilities? How dreadful for you! I smiled blandly, holding off from fueling rumors. Let the Vera debacle fade fully into the past now. That night I sorted through old papers and spotted evidence records from the wire fraud case. I paused, Vera and Hank's embittered faces flashing through my mind. Then I firmly shoved the papers in the shredder. Piece by piece I disposed of the last lingering vestiges of their existence cluttering my orderly world. Soon I could close the book on that chapter for good. With them off, reinventing themselves elsewhere, I finally had closure. Meanwhile, Neil seemed to relax as well, now that his parents were safely out of legal jeopardy, and time had passed since the arrest scandals. We settled fully back into familiar routines. After returning from his teaching job one day, Neil wrapped me in a grateful hug. I'm glad we can just focus on us again. No more disputes interfering with enjoying each moment together. I squeezed him back happily, the past year's stresses dissipating further. Harmony was worth far more than any revenge. To celebrate leaving toxicity behind, I indulged in purchasing a long-coveted, rare French dessert I'd bookmarked, symbolic of restoring sweetness to life. The $200 price barely dented savings bolstered from an electricity bill back to normal. One morning, soon after, I walked outside to get the mail and paused, seeing an unfamiliar envelope addressed simply, "To my daughter-in-law." I froze. Vera? How dare she contact me after everything? Hands shaking slightly, I tore the envelope open. Inside, I found a brief note in shaky handwriting. "Lena, I owe you the deepest apology for betrayal that cannot be forgiven. I pray you've found peace. I will not contact or return again." Instead of vindication, a surprising emotion lanced through me. Shame. Because this single conciliatory letter conveyed more authentic remorse than all Vera's tearful drama ever had. I tried justifying my retaliation campaign. She'd brought it on herself. But remembering Vera's broken expression as she drove away in defeat, had getting even truly brought me satisfaction either? Had I become the very monster I hated in her? At that moment, Neil walked up behind me. "What's wrong, honey?" Wordlessly, I handed him the letter. As he read, eyebrows furrowing worriedly, my high moral ground suddenly felt much less secure. Yes, Vera and Hank had acted despicably out of misguided self-interest. But did everyone, even the lowest scoundrel, not deserve redemption someday? Perhaps in banishing Vera so ruthlessly, I had strayed farthest of all from basic human decency. What truly separated my hardball tactics from her manipulations in the end? Weeks later, the matter still pestered my conscience. To clear the air fully, I knew hard conversations remained. One night at dinner, I broke the heavy silence. "Do you ever regret how forcefully we handled things with your parents?" Neil blinked, hesitating thoughtfully. "I just wish communications had stayed more civil on all sides." My face flushed hot with remorse. I shouldn't have kept escalating vengefully. "Can you forgive me?" I held my breath. Neil smiled gently, taking my hands in his. "Of course. Let's leave recrimination buried in the past now where it belongs." The relief of reconciliation washed over me. I still had much self-reflection yet ahead on temperance and compassion. But together, Neil and I would find our way towards better understandings. As we embraced lovingly, I let go fully of the last bitter remnants of score-settling resentment I'd clung to so fiercely. What mattered most was choosing each day to see the best, not the worst, in those around me, including myself.